So, Leonte, thanks again for joining us.
Sure thing.
Yeah, and I know you through our People for Liberty communities. You're one of our wonderful community managers, and I think that your leadership has really helped to make the experience personal for so many people. But why don't we start off with some basics? If you can tell us a little bit about you, about yourself, how you came to the Liberty movement, let's let the people know who you are.
Sure. So my name is Leonte Cooper. I go by my last name for the most part. I started off not being very into politics, graduating from high school, still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I joined the military for a little while. When I found out that that wasn't exactly what I was called to do, I decided to go to school. And I kind of started off small. So I went to my community college. I put myself completely through. I lived by myself during that time. And I worked really, really hard, and I was able to start here about a year and a half ago at Ohio State. So that's where I'm at now. And I would say I got into politics while I was in community college. I was immediately an advocate for the free market, and the only party that I really saw advocating for that hard was the Republican Party. So I aligned myself with them somewhat, but I started to notice there were some aspects of freedom that they might not be so open to. And I started to just, kind of declare myself an independent. I got involved in some student groups and people started to tell me, are you a libertarian? And I didn't even know what that was initially. And I was like, well, yeah. I was like, I don't know. I was like, I'm not really familiar with that. But over time, I started to do my own research, looked into it, and started to call myself a libertarian. And I found the Libertarian Party. I got involved with the local county Libertarian Party a little bit last year. And I've probably been a libertarian maybe for 4 or 5 months now, and I'm loving it.
I love that story. And I think really it speaks to the organic journey a lot of us follow. I identified as Republican for a long time, even though if you had asked me about my views, I would have run down the libertarian principles like verbatim. Let's talk about being fiscally conservative and socially progressive. Let's talk about supporting the free market, individual freedoms, personal responsibility. So tell me, what was it that, really drew you the most to the Liberty movement? And I'll say, I make the distinction between the Liberty movement and the Libertarian Party.
Yes.
Because I think the Liberty movement can be much bigger than just a party.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And I think there's a lot of people that are in the Liberty movement that,
yes,
choose not to align with any parties at all. But I think for me, what really drew me in was when I started to see the reactions in the party that I was in before to some of the demands for social freedom, which to me, I had always heard them, talk about the fact that we need freedom. You can't just tax people and stuff like that. And when people challenged them on freedoms that they might not find themselves comfortable with, they kind of retracted that a little bit. And I think there were a couple of things that kind of set me off. One of the major ones was when Facebook started to disagree with some conservative opinions and decided what they wanted to do with their company as far as how they wanted to regulate what can be put up.
Yep.
Now, I could understand not agreeing with the regulations, but I saw a lot of people turn to the government to try to regulate Facebook that were conservatives. And when I saw that happen, I think that just turned me off because it started to show me that they were pushing an ideology rather than a principle.
Yes.
And when that happened, that kind of just pulled me and sucked me right into full-blown libertarianism.
Well, and I think this is very relevant for a topic today on women's equality. You mentioned social freedoms, and you mentioned, a distinct two-sided duopoly in ideologies. When I think about women's equality and freedom for me as a woman, there are specific barriers that I faced. And I think that there are specific barriers that you have faced as a young Black man. So when we think about equality and personal freedom and individual responsibility, tell me how, your experience as a young Black man, and also likely there's been some strong women in your life, so you can speak to that as well, how that shaped your worldview.
Sure. So growing up, I grew up with a single mom for most of my life, and I saw the barriers that she faced.
Yes.
And I think that seeing that, especially just the barriers that she faced, not only with like laws or any kind of legal thing, but just social regulation, that was kind of hard on her because she had to provide for us and she had to make things happen for us. And at the same time, she had to still operate in the kind of social world that we have right now. And that those interests kind of conflicted sometimes. So, I've always considered myself to be a 100% ally for social freedom in any form, whether that's for women's freedom, African Americans' freedom, LGBT freedom, and I don't support regulating or social interventions into that. And her life probably was the greatest influence when that came to that.
I love that. So tell us a little bit more then about your mother, who obviously holds a very dear place in your heart, and what you saw through her eyes about limited social freedoms or those barriers.
Sure. So, when we were growing up, it was me, myself, and my sister, and it was also my mom. So we were, together, and we were kind of alone in that aspect. And my mom, she always wanted to make sure that we never had a bad Christmas. She always wanted to make sure that we never had a bad birthday. But she also wanted to make sure that she didn't miss things. And to provide those things, she had to miss things sometimes. So, for example, there were times where we had events at school, and in order to make sure that we had a good Christmas, she couldn't come to every Christmas play, Yeah. And I remember even now with her being, single, she works as a manager where she's at, as an event planner for a hotel. And what you'll find a lot of times is the people that are above her, like her managers, they take a different approach in dealing with her than they would with someone else. And seeing her kind of have that intrusion, which I might not have, because there's certain like social norms that are associated with me that aren't associated with her. Mm-hmm. And that kind of is what really, I'll say it radicalized me in the libertarian sense. And it made me realize that there does need to be some sort of vocal movement against any kind of repression of social and economic freedoms. Because when you go back and you look at how the women's movement started, it started on the basis of economic freedoms, where you had women that didn't have property rights, and I know people in the conservative movement who are very, very outspoken against feminism, and I think that comes from either a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means or a decision to push what they want to push. And I push for freedom all around the board.
Yes.
But it started off with the property and contract rights, where you had back in the day, women couldn't own property. If they got married, they had to turn their property over to their husband. You even had states up until, I would say, like the 1970s that had male head of household laws that still considered a woman to be, and all of her property to be the property of her husband, where men could rape women and violate that non-aggression principle. I mean, that is like a clear violation. And when you talk about the difference between, I think, what the Republican Party and the Libertarian Party does, the Republican Party considers themselves as individuals, but I've always considered them as more communitarians, because they'll support some sort of community control over the social world. And that kind of gives them the validation that they kind of need to intervene. But up until, I would say, like second wave, you had women that were fighting for voting rights, where now it's about political freedom. And when I think about all this, I'm like, okay, so what about this is not libertarian? Because I saw some opposition to it, and I was trying to, go through it and find out where the problems were. And I think I found it when you talk about what's going on right now, and it also comes from a misunderstanding. Regulation doesn't just happen through law. There's another sort of regulation that happens in the social sphere, where you're regulated of what you can do because of what you're expected to do or what are the norms. And it takes more mental effort to go outside of that than it would otherwise. So now, you have people that point out the disparities in what happens with women's outcome and compared to men's outcomes and things like that. And I think people ignore that factor where the social regulation comes in. And I'm not only a supporter of equal rights, but I also support equal treatment. So I believe that that's the best way that you can not only abolish the part of it that says, you know, if you do this, you're going to go to jail, or if you do this, you're going to have some kind of agent come to your house and tell you what you ought to be doing. It also makes it so that women are free to do it, even if they want to, but society would also be on their team and not, you know, railing against them and bringing friction against them and the things that they want to do. So I think that aspect of it, that aspect of it is the part that people are missing. So they're like, well, women they can already vote and they can already, you know, do this. And they don't understand that there is, you know, social consequences to the laws that we had in place before. And I think that, you know, that's something that people of all different and diverse identities can, you know, relate to women about. So you have, you know, the African American community, where now you'll have people say, well, we have this sort of equality, but it's the consequences of those laws that still put the social obligations on what's going on right now.
Yes.
That's what people are complaining about. Or, you know, the LGBT community, where they're like, well, you can already, you know, you don't have to worry about the police seizing into any bars or anything like that. That may be true, but there's still the social forces that sort of regulate in place. And I think that not everybody has come to the place in their mind where they're ready to see that part go as well.
Yes. And I love that this continues some of the earlier conversations we've had, Leonte, around, you know, everyday misogyny, or around, you know, expectations in the workplace, or, as you said, you know, if there's a violation of a social norm, that's not necessarily a regulation or a rule or a law, but the way that our culture or society has adapted, women have adapted to meet those social norms. Exactly. Just as the African American community has adapted and the LGBTQ community has adapted. And I think we are in that challenging place now where we want to break free. I don't want to be held to norms that don't serve me and that don't serve my fellow women. And we need to see past just the regulations to the true and lasting difference in our culture. So, you know, Leonte, as a community manager, you're in a unique position where you're helping to steer conversations, you're helping to share content and thought leaders. So, you know, how do we shift culture? How do we shift social norms?
Sure thing. I think that what needs to happen is there needs to be a realization of the fact that where you have these social movements that are popping up, these aren't necessarily, they're individual, but they're connected still. And they have points and places of connection. So when you talk about police brutality is one example. When you talk about police brutality, that is a place where not only African Americans can be sympathetic and out there fighting for that and trying to make sure that that's regulated, but also people in the LGBT community can understand their history and why that would be something that relates to them, and also the women's community can understand why that would be something that pertains to them as well. And I think that the understanding that there's like these places where those different identities connect in what's going on, that is the place where we can kind of grab some sort of cohesion and some sort of tolerance for each other to make sure that there's a stronger voice there, where it doesn't seem like it's just an easy minority to ignore.
I love that. And thinking around those connection points and community, will you tell us a little bit about, you know, your role as a community manager and the groups that you're helping to serve?
Sure. So being a community manager, I think that, and especially the way that the different groups have been set up, I think that it's amazing, because what it has done is it's brought people in a way that they're comfortable with. So they're coming in not just, okay, this is the liberty movement, but they also see a point of identification that they already agree with, that they already have some sort of sense of community with. So you have Blacks for Joe Jorgensen, you have women for Joe Jorgensen, educators for Joe Jorgensen, the military for Joe Jorgensen. So they know that they're coming in with a community that they already have some sort of identification with ahead of time, and they're coming in to learn something new. And I think that is a major influencer, because when I post things in something like Blacks for Joe, I am posting out of my own experience, and I can relate that to the liberty movement. And that is something that people that aren't familiar with the liberty movement can grasp a source of understanding from to comprehend the rest of it.
Well, and I think that speaks very much to our mission at People for Liberty to engage people, embrace principles, and affect change. And where I saw, kind of white space or a gap in the liberty movement was there wasn't enough being done around culture.
Yes.
A ton being done in rhetoric and academia and, stating those principles. But how are people living the principles? How are we supporting them in building a culture and a culture of cohesion and mutual respect? It's not enough for us to say, oh, we believe in mutual respect and non-aggression. We have to live it too.
Exactly. From what I understand, when I'm inside of those groups and listening to the different things that people are talking about, the way that the liberty movement is reaching out now, it is a way that connects. Because my mom, for example, she's been a Democrat for her entire life. But what really turned her off to Republicans was not necessarily that she didn't agree with anything that they said, or it wasn't even necessarily that she agreed with the Democrats more. It was the fact that the Democrats reach out and embrace those different groups and don't act like they don't exist that really, really trapped and really brought in my mom's mind to them. So she's been into that. And when I told her, initially that I thought that I was a Republican, she was kind of opposed to that because she felt like there was no room in that. But when I showed her, when all of the protests and everything broke out, when I showed her that I had become a libertarian and the libertarians were embracing it, but they were embracing it from a principle perspective. They weren't violating any of their principles, but they were embracing what was going on and people's different opinions, people's different perspectives, and showing how the liberty movement can do well for them individually.
Yes. Well, and I think you bring up an important point, Leonte, in that having conversations around politics is emotional, and people start to identify with a party. And they start to feel as if their sense of self-worth is defined by their choice of party. And that's where it gets tricky. And why having individuals like you helping to serve as community managers help to guide those conversations by making sure we're listening first.
Exactly. Because, with women, with the different identities out there, I'm not going to completely and fully understand everything that a woman goes through. I'm just not going to be able to understand it on an emotional level. So when someone's trying to explain it to me, I have to come into the conversation knowing that there's a barrier. I can still use my own reasoning and try to, bring in my belief system and what I've been shaped and molded, but I have to come in with that lens of understanding that I don't understand what it feels like to, go to a clinic and be told no when there's a crisis in front of me. I don't know what it feels like when I'm at work and I'm given a position that people feel like I would be better suited for. I don't know that feeling. So because I don't know that feeling, I'm going to come from it from a perspective of just, some sort of like induction, like my cold logic and reasoning. And when someone comes at it from a place of experience, it affects them in a different way. And knowing that ahead of time is what can place me inside of a place where I can be more receptive and have a better and more productive conversation, and it not just go into, kind of this left field, me versus you, not trying to come to any kind of conclusion.
I love that. And I think you are helping us to really understand viable ways to engage with one another and engage with other people who might have different views. So, Leonte, if you had to offer some of your recommendations to people who want to talk about their beliefs or their principles or the liberty movement, what would be some recommendations that you have on how to engage?
Sure. So for me, and this is what I've noticed, when you really start to kind of get immersed into libertarian principles and you start reading books and, it all becomes super clear to you, I've noticed that I can become dense initially, where I'm like, well, you cannot, give out social services because you're stealing from someone else. That is true. But the problem with that is that someone else is saying to you that we need social services because this will help people. But libertarians also know that some of these social service programs don't work. And what they can do is they can switch so much from that cold response to a more consequential response. Like, I want to help people too. And this is the way that I think it can help people because because that, not just a cold shoulder kind of response that kind of, flattens them on like a principle, even though we do believe in the principles and we hold them dear. But there are very, very clear recommendations for liberty that are on the basis of because it works rather than on the basis of because of the principles on every conversation.
And that's really putting the solution first, or the shared outcome we hope to achieve first. Let's not debate about tactics. We both want to help people. We might have different ideas about the best way to do that. In my mind, a bloated welfare state is not the way to do it. I studied welfare reform. I could quote statistics to you all day, but that's not how I engage in the conversation. To your point, we start from a place of connection. So exploring maybe first, what are the ways that you connect with this person or that you have similar views, or talk about the shared solution or shared outcome that you both want to achieve, right?
Exactly. Because people are becoming less sympathetic to when you see, what's going on with, people in my generation and younger generations. They're having this kind of understanding of politics differently, where they're saying to themselves, this is a system that our great-grandparents built, and they look during the times that their great-grandparents grew up, and the social sphere is completely different. So we kind of built around that other way of thinking. So they feel like, well, and to them it makes so much sense. To them it brings so many different things together and accomplishes so many different goals. If someone comes in and tries to introduce to them that have all these emotions connected to their idea and says, well, you can't do that because that will make you a thief. They don't feel like they are trying to do something bad. They feel like they're trying to do something good. So they kind of brush that aside. But if you say, well, we tried that before and this was the outcome of this, I have an idea, let's fix it by doing this, that they will be more sympathetic to hearing rather than some kind of cold, disconnected belief.
I love that, and I appreciate the distinction between, a rote response or a code response versus being empathetic and listening and coming from a place of experience. Leonte, if you had recommendations for men or male allies who want to support women, especially on today, Women's Equality Day, what would be some of your recommendations for men who want to be allies?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, being opening to listening is the number one thing. So like, I remember when I initially started with being introduced to feminism, and because the ideas are might be disconnected from the way that you have previously thought, it's hard to initially come to say, okay, I'm willing to listen. You are in response mode. You're ready to respond. That's number one. Number two, what I would think is the best thing to do is to understand history and how history affects what's going on right now. If you go back, if you were born, in 2000, in the year 2000 or 1997, and you're 20 years old when Donald Trump is getting elected, you're going to have a different perspective of someone that is saying, well, women have these problems than someone who understands history has. Because someone that understands history knows how things that were in the past are connected to things that are going on now. So something that you might see as a minor problem is something that someone else sees as a problem that has been going on for a long time, and this is just another symptom.
Yes. I love that. And I think it speaks to really examining different perspectives. And as you said, acknowledging the history that might be present in a movement or a cause, be it the cause of liberty, women's equality, the Black community, the LGBT community, people with disabilities, Native Americans. There are so many ways in which, we can find points of connection or identify with each other. But it has to start somewhere, and those points of connection are sometimes small. So,
Exactly.
Leonte, we're going to be wrapping up. Why don't you tell us again, where to find you and maybe how to interact with some of those peer groups. So if people are interested in exploring, finding points of connection and connecting with one another, tell them how they can do that.
Absolutely. So on Facebook, you can find me. My name is the same on Facebook. It's Leonte Cooper. And if you want to, add me as a friend or shoot me a message and just tell me what you're interested in, I can definitely get you connected with different groups. We have like a wide range and a wide variety of different groups. I believe it's like 15. So you can be connected with groups that make you feel comfortable. We have educators for Joe, Blacks for Joe, LGBT for Joe, grassroots for Joe. There's just a ton of different things. So if you connect with me via Facebook, message me, maybe just, tell me what you're interested in or just what you're curious about, I can make sure that I get you connected to the right group.
I love that. And I believe the full list is posted on our People for Liberty Facebook page, which is at People, 4, Liberty Inc. So if you're interested in those 15, 16, it's growing every day, list of groups, connect with Leonte, examine the kind of groups, and see where you might find your people and those points of connection. So whether you're a diehard libertarian or you're just exploring the liberty movement, if you want to find a community, if you want to find people who can answer your questions or ask you some of their own, I think this was a great opportunity. Leonte, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, I will catch up with you online, my friend. Thanks again.
All right, sounds good. See you soon.